Welcome back to the Hitchhiker to Heaven series. Thank you for joining me here in part two as we reflect on the question, do you matter? What I talked about last time can be summed up pretty simply like this. You can determine any sort of personal purpose for your life. It could be special to your desires, like being good at exercising or sports, making lots of money, being good looking, or bringing happiness to others, pursuing your passions, etc. But none of that means that anyone else has to actually see your life as having a real value. Someone else could just come along and determine that your life, in their subjective eyes, isn't that important and can just be done away with. That's the kind of thing that happens all the time in countries with communist governments. They decide that a certain category of citizen isn't valuable to the society, and so they take care of it, quote, quote. Um, Even if you hold to the worldview that humans should try to reduce overall harm, that's completely subjective. In a world where people only have subjective purposes, just kind of what they feel like they're supposed to be about, um, it basically turns into a might is right type of society. That basically whoever has the most power gets to make the decisions. My response is that every human being that has ever lived has an unmeasurable value, an infinite amount of value, because we have a God that is outside of us, that creates us, that gets to decide and determine what our value is, and that He came in and He told us that He loves us so much, every single one of us, that He's willing to die for us. That was probably right about the time in the conversation that images of street preachers started coming to your mind who are, holding signs of doom and gloom of an oncoming Armageddon, and they basically shout out to you that you need to be saved, brother. And I actually agree with them. I do. That yes, we do need to be saved, but the question is, what do we need to be saved from? I made the analogy of an oncoming bus was about to hit somebody, and then somebody else jumps in the way and pushes the innocent person out of the way, but unfortunately the lifesaver loses their life. And in that situation, yeah, there was a threat. There was an oncoming bus. But in our situation, what is it? What do we need to be saved from? And that's exactly what we're diving into in this part of the discussion. So here's how. There's a scene early on in the 2004 movie Troy where it's the Battle of Thessaly, and it's kind of the calm before the storm, before the two sides of the armies have actually started any fighting. But both sides, they stand huddled together with their spears clenched and their shields in hand, and they're equipped, they're ready to fight. But they realize the problem, and this is a problem that most cities had back then. They realized that if many soldiers were to lose their lives on either side, if they were to become crippled, then neither side would really come out a winner. And that's because if you were to kill an opponent, you weren't just killing a soldier, you were killing a farmer, or a blacksmith, or a tailor, a potter, a doctor, or a carpenter. Most soldiers then weren't full-time soldiers, but they were full-time citizens that were willing to lose their life, to die for their country if an enemy came knocking at their door. So what good is ruling over a people that have all their workmen either incapable of work or just recently rendered non-existent? Other than vainglory, not much. So on the cusp of bloodshed, at the front lines of the battle, King Agamemnon, or whatever his name is, of Troy, and King Triopas of Thessaly, they made a rational agreement. They decided that each side would send forth their champion warrior to do battle to death in the open area between the two armies. And whoever's champion were to lose, the kingdom would forfeit the war and indefinitely fall under the submission of the other king. In an extremely swift and precise and short-lasting charge, Troy's champion Achilles, he took the life of Thessaly's champion Boagrius, and with that one death strike, took the entire nation of Thessaly under Troy's dominion. So from that moment on, Thessaly was enslaved to Troy. If this style of champion battle, which is actually formally known as single combat, if it sounds familiar, That's because it was used in many ancient cultures. Egyptian, Hindu, Chinese, Greek, and Roman writings, they all document using single combat. And it was held in high respect not only by the very ancient cultures, but also in the medieval cultures, such as the Irish, British, German, Indian, and Islamic nations. And of course, actually, single combat is still respected really highly on middle school campuses everywhere because when two rival gangs of boys meet at the flagpole and the fight's pretty much over as soon as somebody throws the first punch and someone's nose is bleeding. But I argue that it's actually most recognized from Hebrew history. Around 3,000 years ago, the Israelite and Philistine kingdoms came together for battle. The Philistines, realizing that it would not be wise to sacrifice many men on either side, they chose to be chivalrous, and they sent out their champion to engage in single combat. Their notorious champion warrior's name was Goliath. Israel found none of their men qualified to match Goliath's skills, and so it took a brave volunteer. He was a small, untrained sheep herder boy that attempted to save the kingdom of Israel. And seemingly against all odds, David, the sheep herder, he won the real life battle for Israel even faster and more precisely than Achilles did in the Trojan myth at Thessaly. So from that moment on, once David took out Goliath in the champion battle, Israel was spared from slavery that was threatened by the Philistines. You may be wondering, why am I telling you about single combat? Is it because I'm just some weirdo that likes that kind of stuff? And no, not really. It has to do with why you have something to be saved from. The practice and meaning of single combat was a huge part of the worldview to ancient cultures, especially to the Hebrews who lived during the Old Testament times. It was out of the heart of this ancient Hebrew Jewish culture that claimed you need saving. And then eventually, that Jesus Christ died to save you. So, if you want to understand what it means, you have to understand their perspective. You have to see it from their worldview, and their worldview was heavily influenced by this champion battle style of combat. And I argue the single combat mentality was absolutely fundamental of a context in which the Hebrews understood the human condition. That it's a pivotal lens through which they saw why the human race is the way that it is when they told the story of human history in the book of Genesis. It's why we're fallen. So they basically explain to us that, we're in a condition that God did not intend us to be in. God made humankind perfect, then man chose to rebel against that design. Now we, you and I, and all human beings, we've inherited that broken and unintended nature, and that's why we need saving. Let me explain a little bit further. We all experience the reality of the fall. I mean, how often do you fight against yourself? How often does your conscience tell you to do the right thing, but you decide to do otherwise? How often do you tell yourself you need to exercise and then instead later find yourself practically fused to the couch cushions buried in a jar of peanut butter? It happens to me on pretty much a weekly basis. Or how many times a day do you find yourself saying, I should be nicer, I should be more forgiving, more patient, eat less junk food, stop fantasizing about that hot guy or girl over there, stop dissing my coworkers, friends, and family members behind their backs. Think of all the tragedies that we see in public lives. Think of how drug addictions brought Elvis Presley, Janis Joplin, Chris Farley, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, Michael Jackson, Heath Ledger, and so many others past the point of control. So why do we constantly do things that we know we shouldn't? People get abused, people get neglected, horribly tragic things happen to completely innocent people, yet you say that we have a good God. You say that he's all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. Well, if that's the case, and he's so competent and desires good, how could things be this way? Here's how the Hebrews understood it. They said that God had a plan. Everything went according to that plan, and once the universe was ready, as the crescendo to God's symphony of creation, humankind was made. And that very first person with a rational soul was completely innocent. He saw the design of the world outside of himself and the design of the world within himself, and he respected it. He was in complete fulfillment by being in perfect union with the truths of God's perfect order for creation. This first man, Adam, he was our champion. His total innocence, because had never been corrupted by an action against the designed order for God's creation, revealed that God made man in a state of perfection. A perfect human, a champion human. We can only speculate what that means, what that was like, but nonetheless, that time and that man existed, but not for long. The first guy on this earth knew and loved God without any obstacle, and he found himself faced with a choice. Our champion faced a battle. You know the saying, if you love something, let it go? Well, it's true. In order for love to be authentic, it must be completely born out of one's free will. There has to be a real choice between choosing to love, choosing to give oneself for the benefit of another, or choosing to turn inward. In order for the first man, Adam, or any human being, to love, they have to be completely free in having the choice of being selfish instead of selfless. So our champion, and his wife was there too, who was once in a state of perfection to his design, to know and to love God, in perfect innocence, he made a choice against God's design for him. Instead of being selfless, instead of loving, he chose to do something selfish. He chose pride. And at that very instant, when Adam made this rebellion against God's order for creation, which was basically the rebellion against Adam's own design, he became something God didn't create. God is so powerful that he can create a being out of his control. He can create a being with true free will. And that being, our champion, abused free will and in turn broke its very nature. Adam's rational soul that connected him to perfect fulfillment with God was severed. This is the fall. Mankind was made in a state of union with God, and now we're born in a state against God's design in disunion. We've fallen from grace. Adam lost the battle. Our champion, the one most fit for the fight, decided to act as a coward. And with the defeat of our champion came the enslavement of our entire kind. Since the best of us lost the battle, humanity inherits the indefinite effects. So this is why I call us the walking dead. We're born into this world with a heartbeat, but we are spiritually dead. It's kind of like the little boy once said, everywhere I look, I see dead people. Some people criticize this story by asking the question, could Adam have ever actually won the battle in the first place? I would say, in order to answer that question, you have to ask the people who are telling the story. So think about the other stories that the Hebrews used that relied on this single combat worldview. Think of David versus Goliath. How unmatched was David? How unprepared and untrained was David compared to the warlord Goliath? Yet who won the battle? David won because he had one impenetrable force on his side. He trusted in God. David put his trust in the truths that God has ordered in his creation. And David said, "Not my will, Lord, but yours." And he overcame a seemingly impossible challenge. Adam said, "Not your will, Lord, but mine." And he lost all supernatural grace, his perfect innocence, and he passed that trait on to the rest of us. So here we are, fallen, a creature not functioning according to God's design. Here we are, born out of a union of knowing and loving God. Here we are fighting against ourselves every moment of every day. What man can fix this? Who can build a stairway to heaven? All hope is lost from our end. So No matter how much we try, by our own devices, we'll never work ourselves into a union with God, because the natural can never raise itself to supernatural. It's going to take a miracle to fix us. It's going to take God himself to save us. Stick around for more. It only gets more and more interesting from here. This is the Hitchhiker to Heaven series. I'm here to give you a lift.